The autumn of 1600. In the heart of Europe, veiled in mist, a small fortress rose toward the sky. Its name was Kanije. At first glance, it seemed like nothing more than a pile of stone. Yet soon, this fortress would become a knot of destiny, not only for the Ottoman Empire, but for all of Europe. The balance of Europe was trembling, kingdoms testing one another like pieces on a vast chessboard. And right at the center of that board, at the Ottoman Empire's gateway to the west, stood Kanije. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden side of history, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. The battle for Kanije is only just beginning. Throughout the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire had loomed like a powerful shadow across Europe. After the fall of Buda, Esztergom, and Eger, the capture of Kanije sent fresh waves of fear through the Habsburg courts. When the fortress fell to the Ottomans in 1600, the great capitals of Europe whispered the same words. The key to the frontier has fallen. For Austria, Kanije was no longer just a fortress. It had become a matter of pride. To reclaim it would mean not only halting the Ottomans, but sending a clear message to Europe itself. We are still here. Kanije's geographical position multiplied its importance. Surrounded by the waters of the Mura and Drava rivers, built upon marshy ground, its natural defenses were formidable. Whoever held it not only possessed a fortress, but also controlled the roads of Central Europe. It was the meeting point of trade caravans, military columns, and supply routes. To hold Kanije was to rule over an entire region. Thus, for Austria, the Ottoman capture of Kanije was a humiliation, and retaking it became a vital goal. Archduke Ferdinand, one of the most powerful princes of the Habsburg throne, was determined to erase this disgrace. He gave the order. Soldiers were summoned from every corner of Europe. German regiments, Hungarian and Croatian fighters, Italian mercenaries, sappers, massive cannons, and catapults. Over 100,000 men marched upon Kanije. Even before the campaign began, expectation in European courts was high. This small Ottoman garrison will be wiped out within weeks. But inside the fortress, a very different spirit reigned. Only 7,000 Ottoman soldiers stood within its walls. From the outside, it looked like an impossible defense. Yet at their head stood a commander who would etch his name into history with patience and cunning. Tiryaki Hasan Pasha. Hassan Pasha was no ordinary leader. He had not earned the nickname Tiryaki for nothing. Hardened by long years on the frontiers, he had mastered the art of waiting and of seizing the right moment. On the Ottoman borderlands, he was known for his patience and calm. Those who saw him would say, "He unravels the enemy's move first in his heart, then crushes it on the battlefield." For Hassan Pasha, war was not fought with sword, cannon, or musket alone. He struck at the enemy's spirit, turning fear itself into a weapon. When the siege began, the Austrian army was full of confidence. Massive cannons were lined before the walls, stones flew from catapults, and the smell of gunpowder filled the sky. The stone walls of Kanije trembled. From Europe's perspective, it was only a matter of time, yet inside, there was no panic. Hassan Pasha stood firm among his soldiers, and in a calm voice he told them one word: patience. This patience soon became the Ottomans' greatest weapon. When the Austrians launched their first great assault, the Ottoman defense erupted like fire. Boiling oil was poured down from the walls, stones rained like hail, and arrows darkened the sky. Enemy soldiers who climbed the walls suddenly found themselves in a hell. The first assault quickly turned into a bloody rout. Thousands of Austrian soldiers were slain within the very first days. But for Hassan Pasha, this was only the beginning. He knew victory would be won not only with swords, but with the mind. In truth, there were very few cannons inside the fortress. Yet Hassan Pasha had wooden decoys made and lined them atop the walls. This simple but brilliant idea did not escape the eyes of Austrian spies. They reported back. The Ottomans have hundreds of cannons. Ferdinand's plans began to waver. Thus began the Defense of Kanije, a tiny garrison against a colossal army. But the difference was this. Outside were numbers. Inside were cunning and faith. Hassan Pasha had already planted fear in the enemy's heart. And at that moment, the course of history began to change. When night fell over Kanije, silence was expected. But silence never came. For every night, Ottoman drums thundered. The deep sound echoed for miles. Tens of thousands of Austrian soldiers in their camp awoke in fright each time. "What is happening? Why do they never stop?" they murmured. The drums were not just rhythm. They meant sleeplessness, fatigue, unease. Tiryaki Hasan Pasha had chosen those sounds deliberately. The night drums told the enemy soldiers, the Ottomans never sleep. They could strike at any moment. Days of this relentless pressure gnawed at even the strongest soldiers' nerves. The massive army, within mere weeks, was already gripped by exhaustion and frustration. But Hassan Pasha's plan did not end there. He knew that war would be won not only at the walls, but also in the mind. So he had false letters prepared. In them it was written, "Tens of thousands of Ottoman soldiers are coming to reinforce." These documents were deliberately left for the enemy to find. A few captured soldiers were released, carrying the letters back to the Austrian camp. And the rumor spread like wildfire. An Ottoman relief army is approaching. In Ferdinand's tent, tense meetings were held. One officer stabbed his finger at the map. "If reinforcements truly come, we'll be trapped in this swamp." Another protested. "No, it's a trick." But what if it's true? That was exactly what Hassan Pasha wanted. Once doubt entered an army, it cut deeper than any sword. Meanwhile, inside the fortress, a different scene unfolded. The Ottoman soldiers battled hunger and fatigue. But Hassan Pasha stood among them like an unshakable rock. Every day he gathered them, saying, "God is with us, do not fear." Prayers were recited, hymns were sung. In the soldiers' eyes shone their trust in their commander. A young Ottoman soldier, pouring boiling oil from the walls, whispered to himself, "Their fear has become our weapon." And so it was. The enemy was being defeated within their own minds. One day, the Austrian army launched a new assault. Tens of thousands of soldiers attacked at once. The walls shook. Clouds of gunpowder darkened the sky. Ottoman soldiers fought hand to hand, sword against sword. Then, suddenly, the sky darkened as heavy rain poured down. Gunpowder was soaked, muskets fell silent. Cannons could not fire. The Austrian soldiers were stunned. From the fortress rose cries of "Allahu Akbar," echoing across the heavens. To the Ottoman soldiers, it felt like a divine sign. Once again, the enemy lost heart. Hassan Pasha turned every setback of the foe into a fresh blow. He allowed the Austrian dead to remain before the walls. At dawn, when their comrades saw thousands of corpses sprawled on the field, the horror of their own dead shook them to the core. That sight inspired fear more powerful than any blade. Tension in the Austrian camp grew. Fights broke out in tents. Soldiers shouted at each other. Some muttered, "This fortress must be bewitched." Another cried, "No, our commanders are driving us to death." Even Ferdinand's orders no longer carried their old weight. The vast army began collapsing in on itself, before truly clashing with the enemy. Inside Kanije, however, the spirit was different. Despite hunger and thirst, the soldiers were bound together. All drew strength from Hassan Pasha's patience. For them, the war was not only to defend the fortress walls, but to guard a faith. Each new day, lines of an unprecedented resistance were being written. As the days of the siege passed, the struggle grew heavier. The stone walls of Kanije cracked under the blows of cannon and fire, smoke rising from the ramparts. But the real battle was not outside the walls. It was inside. Hunger, thirst, and exhaustion. The Ottoman soldiers endured. With dwindling supplies for days, the sacks of flour were nearly gone. Now, thin soups made from a handful of flour mixed with water counted as the single meal of the day. Broken jars collecting rainwater became the only hope of the fortress folk. Yet amid all this deprivation, Tiryaki Hasan Pasha never showed despair. Not for a moment. Each morning he gathered his men, stood tall, and told them, "The enemy is in worse condition than we are. They are in the swamps. We are in our fortress. If we endure, this fortress will not fall." In those moments, a light returned to the soldiers' eyes. For Hassan Pasha was not only a commander, but like a father, keeping their spirit alive. In the enemy camp, the picture was entirely different. The Austrian army, so confident at the beginning, was day by day dragged into the grip of mud, disease, and despair. The swamps killed their horses. Dysentery and typhus cut down tens of thousands. Groans rose from the tents. The dead were hastily buried. Officers who days before had boasted, "This fortress will fall in weeks," now whispered among themselves, "This is going badly." One Austrian soldier wrote in his diary, "The rain never stops. Our feet sink in the mire. Our comrades fall sick. Before us is not just a fortress. It feels as though all of nature itself is against us." And indeed, it was so. It seemed as though nature itself fought alongside the Ottomans. Hassan Pasha was a master at turning hardship into opportunity. One night, he secretly sent a few of his soldiers out of the fortress. His order was clear: approach the enemy camp, and at midnight shout, "The Ottoman army is coming," then return swiftly. That night, the cries echoed in the darkness, spreading panic in the Austrian camp. Soldiers leapt from their tents. Horses panicked and collided. Supply carts overturned. By dawn, not a single spear had been raised. Yet the massive army was left sleepless and afraid. When morning came, Ferdinand was furious. Shouting at his commanders, he demanded, "Why does this fortress not fall?" But the answer was plain. 100,000 men were being worn down by the patience and cunning of 7,000. As the siege dragged on, desertions began among the Austrian troops. Some tried to escape through the swamps. Those caught were punished harshly. But the tales of those who fled further crushed the morale of those who remained. Inside the fortress is a mighty army. They are toying with us. These rumors once more tilted in the Ottomans' favor. Life inside Kanije was not easy either. Hunger wore down their bodies, thirst cracked their lips. Yet among the Ottoman soldiers, one phrase echoed: "We will not surrender." To every envoy sent by the enemy, Hassan Pasha gave the same reply: "For us, there is either victory or martyrdom." These words became an oath for all who lived within the fortress. One night, a young soldier inside the fortress wrote in his notebook, "We are hungry. We are thirsty. But when I look into Hassan Pasha's eyes, All hardships seemed to vanish. In those eyes is such resolve that one no longer fears death. It was this spirit that kept Kanije standing. In the Austrian camp, the collapse of morale could no longer be hidden. Arguments spread among the officers, orders were questioned. Some commanders warned Ferdinand, "If we do not lift this siege, we will lose the army." Yet pride still prevented them from retreating. Hassan Pasha, meanwhile, waited with patience. For patience was the strongest weapon in this war. The endless nights of drums, the false letters, sleeplessness and rumors, all these combined, and the army of a mighty empire began collapsing inward. Behind the walls of Kanije, 7,000 Ottomans struggled with hunger. But the Austrian army faced an even greater enemy, their own fear. As the heavy days of autumn passed, the patience of the Austrian army wore thin. Ferdinand, desperate to salvage his pride, resolved on one final strike. He gave the order, "All units attack. Kanije will fall today." The vast camp erupted in motion. Drums beat, bugles blared. Tens of thousands of soldiers lifted their shields and marched toward the fortress walls. The sky darkened with arrows. The ground shook with thousands of footsteps. The Austrian army pinned its last hopes on this assault. Behind the walls of Kanije, the Ottoman soldiers stood ready. Though hungry, thirsty, and weary for days, determination burned in their eyes. Hassan Pasha climbed the battlements and shouted, "Today is the day of victory or martyrdom." His words fell like fire into the hearts of his men. War cries rose from the walls. As the assault began, the Ottoman defense ignited. Cauldrons of boiling oil were toppled one after another. Stones rained down from above upon the enemy. Ottoman archers loosed volley after volley. Muskets filled the air with gunpowder smoke. Small gates swung open, and Ottoman soldiers launched sudden raids upon enemy lines. Hand-to-hand combat erupted. The clash of swords mingled with cries of "Allahu Akbar." At first, the Austrian soldiers seemed to advance, but soon counterattacks from within the fortress broke their formation. Against the Ottomans' determination, neither cannons nor numbers could prevail. An Austrian soldier screamed to his comrade amid the chaos, "This is impossible. They never end." Yet within the fortress, food had run out. But soldiers who fought with faith appeared inexhaustible. After hours of bloody combat, the Austrian army was forced to retreat. Thousands of corpses lay before the walls. The groans of the wounded mingled with the night. It was not merely a defeat, but the breaking of an army's pride. Ferdinand was consumed with rage. In his tent, he quarreled with his commanders. Some declared, "It is impossible now, we must retreat." For Ferdinand, those words were like death itself. Yet the truth was undeniable. His army was spent. Disease, hunger, desertions, and the collapse of morale had converged. There was no longer any meaning in remaining before Kanije. The proud Austrian army had no choice but to withdraw. Historians record that around 35,000 Austrians perished during the siege, with thousands more wounded. On the Ottoman side, losses were far fewer. Within the fortress, joy exploded. The Ottoman soldiers, who had endured with patience for weeks, embraced each other, praying and shedding tears of victory. They had preserved not just a fortress, but the honor of an empire. Hassan Pasha stood before his soldiers and addressed them. "We endured with patience. We triumphed with faith. This victory is your work." These words summarize the entire siege. The Ottomans' determination, cunning, and faith had combined to write one of history's most brilliant defenses. The echoes of victory soon reached all of Europe. Venetian envoys described the resistance with admiration in their reports. The phrase, "The Ottomans remain unbeaten," circulated in European courts. Austria, meanwhile, was plunged into humiliation. Ferdinand's ambition was broken. The Habsburg pride struck a heavy blow. In Ottoman history, the defense of Kanije was never forgotten, even centuries later. It was remembered as an epic long before Gallipoli, for here was not only a military victory, but a struggle of faith. It was proof of how the few could withstand the many, how wit could overcome brute force. The lesson of Kanije was clear. It is not numbers that prevail, but reason and patience. To halt an army of 100,000 with only 7,000 was possible not by sword alone, but by faith and strategy. And that is why the defense of Kanije was not a legend, not a fable, but a true historical epic. An epic written with blood, with sweat, and with unyielding resolve.